So that's a piece called Mendocino Coast Storm, and I wrote that in the mid-2000s, but my life as a composer started a lot earlier than that. So that piece, we'll later pick it apart a little bit, but when I first started writing music, I would just have an idea and just go with it. I just have a little, I'd noodle around, you know, play. I'd play around, I'd hear things I didn't like, I'd hear things I did like, and then I would come up with something like, one of the first pieces I wrote was Duwamish. And the thing that I liked was, and then I experimented with different ways of doing that. Things like that. And then I put it all together as a piece. That's how I used to write music. And I would write music by writing it on ledger paper. This is a photocopy of the ledger paper. I write it by hand, and sometimes it's hard to read the notes. But then in 2008, or actually 2006, computer software came out. Finale is one program, Sibelius is another one. Newer programs are Dorico. There are a lot of different music software writing programs that you can use. And then I come up with something more like that. So anyway, so I wrote piano pieces for a while, up until the late, like 2008, 2009, 2010. And then in 2011, I met my wonderful wife, Jay, and I know this is solo creatives, but no creative is solo. No man is an island, right? No woman is an island. So I finally got inspiration. In 2008, I wanted to make an album. I finally got inspiration to make an album and recorded some of it with Paul McCandless in 2011. And one of the pieces I recorded was called Of the Woods. And just back up for a minute, the way I write music is sometimes I'll have a little idea and then it will just come out like almost like toothpaste. I know that's kind of weird, but that's how I felt about this song. It would come out 2 measures at a time. So the first day it was, that was it. And then the next day I had this much. And then I repeat that. And then from there I go on. So that might have been the 3rd or 4th or 5th day already that I was writing the piece. So I'd write it a little bit at a time. I was doing other jobs at the time. I wasn't full-time doing music. And then I came up with some interesting chord structures. Well, in 2011, I wanted to write something that worked with it. Now, this is called Of the Woods, and the inspiration is a Pacific Northwest deep forest, old-growth forest, beautiful sweeping trees, soaring trees. So this soaring melody needed something that was coming down, something flying through the forest. And I'm not sure if I even thought of that at the time. I just knew that this sounded good. So that's the oboe part. And at the time, I also felt like I was sort of listening to some bossa nova and thinking that was a really cool thing to do. And only this year did I add a bassoon part, or cello or bassoon part. So with the oboe, it goes like this. Again. So there's some nice harmonic intervals, and this is where I'll talk about sort of theory, idea of writing music. If you're wanting to write music, a lot of singer-songwriters use fairly simple chords. The one chord, the 4 chord, which is 4 notes above in terms of the white keys, and then 5. And things like that. And the way that those notes vibrate, one wave goes 3 times, one goes 2 times in the same amount of time. That's a very pleasant thing to hear. What's not so pleasant to hear is things like this. That can create some tension. Then you've got the minor third interval. Now, a major chord has a minor third, a major third, and a minor third on top. That sounds great because you've got this interval. This interval, I think, is 4:3. I don't know. It's another ratio that's pretty simple. And when I was doing physics, I looked at this on an oscilloscope, and you could see the waves where they'd match up. And that's very pleasing to many people. But as years went on and people like Prokofiev, Shostakovich, Schoenberg came along, some of that Western harmony sort of got thrown out the window. The thing is, there's still 12 notes. So there's no such thing as atonal. So because they're always tones, there's always tone center. Anyway, I'm going into theory and going into the weeds, but here we have a lot of things in this piece. When I have the oboe and the bassoon part, a little bit later I go, that's the oboe, and here what I added for the bassoon was, hear that interval? That's a ninth or a second. That's the minor second there. But if I did this, that sounds weird. Even though they're fourths, which is a nice interval, but something about parallel fourths doesn't sound good. It might sound good, it might not sound good, but there's something more comforting for me about that. So it's really an emotional thing. Music is an emotional thing. So you're trying to create emotion. And in this piece, I'm trying to create emotion of harmony, of beauty, but there is a little bit of dissonance in there because, remember, things are decaying all the time. Creatures are eating other creatures. It's not all just everything is sweet and everyone's singing Kumbaya in the forest. It's a little different than that. So I do put some dissonance in the piece. And now what is this? That's a fifth on top of a fifth. I love the fifth on top of a fifth. And then when you put this, I love the feeling of this. You put these fifths on, and so this comes under. And there's something called the cycle of fifths. If you play fifths apart, if you keep going for 12 steps, you're going to come back to where you started. You're going to go around what they call a circle of fifths. So I love playing around with those kind of things. So what I did with that piece was I decided to name it Yoga Morning because it kind of felt like that expansive stretching, and I played a little slower than that normally. So another thing that was interesting in Of the Woods, I, for some reason, wanted to change keys at one point. Let's see. So I go from D flat to E. So it's up a minor third. And lo and behold, since I listened to classical most of my life, I said, well, what in classical could have inspired that? Perhaps it was Chopin. Different but similar. It goes from D flat to E, same keys as I used. And there's also a Brahms piece that I think was influenced by the Chopin, in Of the Woods. More of a feeling of the piece, the peaceful feeling of the piece, and some dissonance. Brahms loves to change keys. So that's Of the Woods. And there's a lot more to it than that. And it is on my albums, on my Of This Earth album as a duo. There's going to be a trio on the next album I'm doing. So musically, I'll talk a little bit about sort of my musical life. A few years ago, I applied to Mostly Modern Festival and got in. It's a festival of composers, performers, singers, and there's faculty and conductors, actually people learning conducting and all different things at this festival, and you get performed a chamber piece. So I wrote a chamber piece both years. I went 2 years, and so it's in Saratoga Springs, New York. It's a wonderful music festival, and they allow 30 composers to come. So it's not as competitive as Tanglewood, which I think has over 100 people apply and only 5 people get in each year. And I haven't been a composer, professional, working composer, and that's my only thing. A lot of people have one career and that's what they do. I have many careers, and that's why my music, I think, is interesting, because it brings in farming, it brings in nature, it brings in environmentalism, it brings in politics, all different issues that I have been involved with in my life. So I have a piece, one of the pieces I wrote there is called Regenerate, Heal, Cool, which is and it's for 6 different instruments. So here's the score. I don't know if you can zoom in on the score. And this is a part, actually the flute player made some notes on her part and sent me the PDF of that. So composing's a lot different than it was in Beethoven's time when he had to do it all on paper. And and here's the clarinet part, bassoon, piano, viola, and bass. So that was an interesting combination. They asked me to write for the non-typical instruments, which is what they call the Pierrot ensemble, which is flute, clarinet. Actually, this one, they'd ask you to write for oboe, actually. And I didn't do oboe on that year, but I did oboe the next year. And so that was all about regenerative farming. The first movement looks at a monoculture farm, and the second movement looks at a biodiverse farm. So the second movement, I love odd rhythms, so it's in 13/8, and it has different groupings of 3s and 2s together, 3s, 2s, and 4s. So it has a dance feeling, and it never feels like it's anything regular. And the first movement is in 2/4. It's like boom, 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 boom. It's a very driven. You're driving a tractor. You're compacting the earth. You're spraying pesticides. You're killing bugs. You're doing it all over again. You're having floods. You're having droughts, because the same compacted soil can go from flood to drought in no time. Whereas in the regenerative or organic farm, you've got much more absorption of water, much more biodiversity. And so I've got bird calls in the second half of that. This one's called Normalizing Evil, and that's a piece for our times as dictatorships around the world are growing more and more. So I take 2. I took Hitler between 1924 and 1945, and there's a protest song, and there's everyone playing their own song, and then in modern times, President number 45 and now to be number 47 and some of his speech patterns and some of Hitler's speech patterns woven together with the other music, with the protest songs. So that's a very political song, and that's for flute, bassoon, percussion, harp, piano, and cello. And actually, these pieces are getting recorded. They got recorded earlier in November, and there'll be a new album next month, or next year sometime, early in the year, hopefully. So we've got Mendocino Coast Storm. Sometimes I compose mathematically. I wrote a piece in 17 rhythm, 9/17. So we have 9, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, and then 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Now, when I was 18, I was in Greece, and I learned Greek folk dancing, and I love the odd rhythms. I absolutely love the odd rhythms, and I thought someday, I didn't even think someday I'm going to compose, because at that point, I didn't think about composing till I was 23. After I'd gotten out of college, I didn't start writing music, and all of a sudden, it just started happening. So anyway, those rhythms come in. There's that rhythm in the Regenerate piece, and there's rhythm in there. So probably want to hear a little more music, but I'm just going to go back to this piece, Mendocino Coast Storm. And what I did was there's 6/8 measures, so there's 12. If I played those, but those are actually, so there's 60. There are 12 in there, and 12 times 5 is 60. And I was dating someone who was born in 1960. My brother was born in 1960. And the Sumerians in many cultures had a base 60 because it can be divided by, and now I'm going to go into this little bit of math geekiness, but it can be divided by 5 and 3 and 2 and 4. There are all different ways you can divide 60, and so 60 was a very almost sacred number back in the Middle Eastern, way back in history. So anyway, I had groupings there, so I had these 2 measures that are rising. I'm trying to make the ocean. And then 3 measures of this. So those are rising measures. And so what comes after that? What comes after that is another group of 5 measures where I have the waves crashing, because this is just the wind and the build-up to the waves crashing. So there's kind of a arc of the music. And then here comes the first wave. So that crashes, and then the second wave. So that's the second wave crashing. And then I go back, then I invert the first tune. I actually took these notes and I go down. And so I do that for 2 measures, and then I do instead of these rising measures, let's see. Then I have that go down, and then I do a second set of waves, and then that peaceful part that you heard in the beginning is every California storm has a pause in the middle of it, has kind of a what do you call it? In the eye of a storm, but it's a calm eye of a storm. They're not hurricanes, they're just storms. And so that's that part, and then it goes back and the storm comes back again. Like after the eye of the hurricane passes, you get the storm again. So that's that piece. A little bit about how I orchestrate. Actually, first, I'm going to talk a little bit about October 8 and 9. And another way I write pieces is I think of a story, of a situation. In this case, it was a very traumatic story. And so the first thing we had someone asked me to write a piece about the fire. It was some monologues that Jay and some others were performing in, and she wanted introductory music for it. So I said, okay, what's a fire theme? So that's the fire theme. Very urgent kind of theme. The next thing I came up with was wind, which is going to be the same kind of rhythm, but a little calmer. And then the next thing I came up with was Jay came home from an artist residency. So very peaceful. And so what did I have to put before that? Why did you come home from the residency? Red flag warning. We had a red flag warning. She said, I'm not going to leave you alone again, because we had a previous fire where I was up there fighting the fire and she couldn't get back up the hill because they wouldn't let her back up. So here's a red flag warning. So then there's the Jay home, then the wind. And then Joyful Reunion was the next thing I wrote, because we had a really nice time reuniting that night. And then after that, there's wind, and then there's a romantic evening. And that repeats once or twice, depending on things. So I just wove all those together into the piece, and that's kind of how I wrote the piece. And we're out of time, so I can't really play that for you. Here's a little bit how I orchestrate a piece of music. This is Seattle, Cascade, Shutters, Corners. The first part is about rain in Seattle, very, very tumultuous and very, not violent, but very upbeat. And the second part is an idyllic theme. You're coming down the road at night, in the evening, after you've pedaled up and down these hills and we're really wiped out. You get to relax. In between, there's an interlude. And here's how I take the piano part. Of that interlude. So I could play that, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to set that up. So here what's in the top, and the bottom is an accompaniment. So a nice way to do that in the orchestra seems to be to have the woodwinds play the top part and the strings play the bottom part. Because it was a chamber orchestra. There were 12 instruments. So here that goes. You hear the oboe playing that melody. And the strings are playing the bass. And another thing is that I changed the woodwinds from one expression of the theme to another. So there's a little color change. And so there's a lot to orchestral writing, and I'm just still learning. It's only been a few years since I've been writing for orchestra. And then the piano brings the theme in. This is that idyllic theme, the second part of the piece. And then the oboe comes in. That's a nice little melody that goes with that. bassoon will come in. So thank you for listening, and I hope that inspired you to write music in whatever way you like to write music, using the different emotions, different forms, different tempo, different rhythm, different tonality. It's really fun, and if you're starting as a singer-songwriter, you can branch out and have some more fun. So that's that. Making a new album. It'll be out next spring. We've got a couple albums here, and I had a nice article in June in August in the Artful Mind, which has Billy Keane on the front, great musician, but I'm on the inside. So, well, he's on the inside too. We're both on the inside. So, thanks for listening and watching.